don't know. I think if you ever hit on that subject matter, you're going to get people going, because
Of course.
it's big subject matter, and it's like, And my contention is, when I was making it, it was like, you're making this film, and the idea was that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice was for all mankind, and that for all our ills and all the things in our fallen nature, it was a redemption.
High in the Himalayas, behind monastery walls no outsider was ever meant to breach, the monks of Tibet have guarded a secret for over 1,000 years. They called it terma, hidden treasure. Sacred teachings buried in caves, sealed in mountain rock, passed in whispers between the chosen few. The Western world spent decades and billions of dollars trying to get close to it. Billionaires funded monasteries. An entire spiritual movement built itself around one conviction: that these monks had cracked the code on human suffering, and the rest of us were just too loud to hear it. They were wrong. Because the answer the monks had been circling for centuries, the thing buried deepest beneath all that incense and silence, was found not on a Himalayan mountaintop, but in a Hollywood disaster, by a flawed, broken, publicly humiliated man who found the truth the monks couldn't name inside a faith they never considered, and a film the entire entertainment industry tried to kill. That man is Mel Gibson. And what he uncovered, the monks needed you never to find out. By the end of this video, you will never look at either of them the same way again. The secret world the monks built. Before we get to Mel Gibson, you need to understand what the Tibetan monks were actually doing, and more importantly, what they were hiding. The tradition of concealed knowledge in Tibetan Buddhism goes back over 1,000 years. There is a formal name for it. The monks call these hidden teachings terma, a Tibetan word meaning treasure. According to the tradition, when Buddhism faced persecution in Tibet under the 8th century King Langdharma, the great masters didn't simply let their most sacred knowledge die, they buried it. They hid sacred manuscripts in caves, in mountains, sealed inside rocks and rivers, even, according to some accounts, inside the minds of chosen individuals who would not even know what they were, carrying until the right moment arrived. Think about that for a second. Teachings so powerful, so dangerous, so world-altering, that the monks decided the world wasn't ready for them. They had to be concealed until humanity caught up. Now ask yourself this: what could possibly be so threatening about a spiritual teaching that the people who believed in it felt the need to bury it from the rest of the world? The answer is more disturbing than you might expect. The Sakya Monastery in Tibet holds one of the most extraordinary hidden libraries ever discovered. A collection of ancient manuscripts that scholars believe contains knowledge predating much of what the modern world has formally recorded. For generations, those texts sat sealed in cellars, stacked in mountain valleys, locked away from ordinary eyes. Only a fraction has ever been translated. The rest, still hidden, still guarded, and the Great Kantua, the 108-volume sacred texts that holds the same importance in Tibetan Buddhism that the Bible holds in Christianity, sits in pieces across multiple locations, most of it never read by outside eyes. Monks have carried these secrets for generations, passed them on, protected them. But here is the question that nobody in the Western spiritual world ever stopped long enough to ask. What if the secret they were protecting wasn't actually the answer? What if the secret they were hiding was the fact that they hadn't found the answer yet? Because when you strip away the mystique, the rituals, the incense, and the centuries of prestige, Tibetan Buddhism, at its philosophical core, is a tradition wrestling with the same problem every major faith tradition in human history has grappled with: the problem of suffering, why we experience it, what it means, and most importantly, whether it can be redeemed. And that is exactly where the monks, for all their centuries of searching, kept running into a wall, the question they couldn't answer. Here is the central teaching of Buddhism. Pay attention, because this matters. The Buddha's first noble truth states that life is dukkha, suffering, dissatisfaction, impermanence. Everything you love will end. Everyone you know will die. Everything you build will crumble. The pain is built into the architecture of existence itself. The Buddhist answer to this truth is noble and ancient and demanding. Detach. Let go. Release your grip on desire, on ego, on the illusion of permanence. And through long years of meditation and discipline, you can reach a state where suffering no longer touches you. They called it nirvana, the extinction of craving, the end of the self. It is a profound teaching. Millions of people have found genuine peace through it. The monks of Tibet took it further than almost anyone, developing sophisticated systems of mind training, dream yoga, and meditative practice that Western neuroscientists are only now beginning to understand. But here is where the wall appears. Here is the crack in the monastery ceiling that the monks never fully addressed. Because the Buddhist framework, for all its beauty, answers the problem of suffering by trying to step around it, by teaching you to detach from it, to stop wanting things so badly that losing them hurts, to eventually dissolve the very self that experiences pain in the first place. And here is the question I want you to sit with. What if suffering isn't a problem to be avoided? What if suffering is actually the door? What if the deepest truths about human existence, about love, about sacrifice, about what it actually means to be alive, can only be accessed through suffering, not around it? The monks spent centuries building systems to escape through the exit. And the thing they were hiding, the thing their tradition could never quite explain, was whether the exit was actually the way forward at all. The man who went through the fire. Now, Mel Gibson. Let's be honest about who this man is, because the story doesn't work if we sanitize it. Mel Gibson was born in Peekskill, New York, in 1956. He moved to Australia as a child. He studied acting. He became one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. Mad Max, Lethal Weapon, Braveheart. He directed a film that won him the Academy Award for Best Picture and Best Director. By every external measure, he had everything, and he was, by his own admission, falling apart on the inside. By his mid-30s, Gibson described himself as having been, in his own words, a pretty wild boy, quite frankly. He had walked away from the Catholic faith he was raised in. He was chasing everything the world told him success looked like. And the closer he got to the peak of Hollywood, the emptier it felt. He described reaching a point of genuine personal crisis, standing at what he would later describe as an abyss, looking down into nothing. Do you know what that feels like? That moment when you have everything the world told you to want, and you realize it wasn't the thing? The monks of Tibet would tell you to detach, to release, to let the wanting go. Mel Gibson did something different. He fell. He went into the suffering instead of trying to escape it. He hit rock bottom, not as a philosophical exercise, not as a meditation technique, but as a lived human experience. The kind of bottom where you either break completely or you find something underneath you that is stronger than the fall. And what he found underneath him was the faith he had abandoned. The 10-year journey nobody talks about. Here is the part of the Mel Gibson story that most people miss, and it is the part that changes everything. Between the height of his early Hollywood success and the making of The Passion of the Christ, Gibson went through what he described as a 10-year spiritual journey, a decade of returning to his roots, wrestling with his faith, confronting the parts of Christian tradition that he had dismissed as a young man, as, in his own words, feeling like a fairy tale. He came back to traditionalist Catholicism, not the polished, modernized version of the faith that had made peace with secular culture, the old, demanding, uncompromising version. The version that said suffering is not an accident. The version that said pain has a purpose. The version that placed at the very center of its belief system the most extreme image of suffering the world had ever seen. A man nailed to a cross and said, "This is what truth looks like." And for the first time in his life, Gibson didn't look away from it. He leaned in. He began studying the Passion of Christ, the final hours of Jesus, with an intensity that shocked people around him. He read accounts. He engaged with historical texts. He sat with the imagery of a man who, according to his faith, knew exactly what was coming, had the power to stop it, and chose not to. A man who went into suffering deliberately, who did not detach from it, who did not float above it in meditative peace, who screamed, who bled, who cried out in anguish from the cross itself, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And who then said, "It is finished." Gibson later said that when he truly understood what that story was claiming, not as mythology, not as fairy tale, but as an event that he believed actually happened in real human history, it shook him to his foundation. Because if it was true, if that suffering was real, and if that suffering was chosen, and if that chosen suffering was the mechanism through which something impossible became possible, then everything the monks of Tibet had been searching for had already been answered, not in a cave, not in a hidden manuscript, not through 10,000 hours of meditation on a hill outside Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. The film they tried to kill. Now, we arrive at the moment that exposed everything. Mel Gibson decided he was going to make a film about the Passion of Christ. Not a comfortable Sunday school version. Not a reverent, sanitized Hollywood biblical epic with good lighting and a sweeping orchestra. He was going to put audiences inside the worst 12 hours in Christian history and make them feel every second of it. Hollywood looked at this idea and reacted with something between contempt and panic. The opposition was fierce, documented, and real. Studio executives wanted nothing to do with it. Industry insiders questioned whether modern audiences would pay to watch a film focused almost entirely on suffering, sacrifice, and biblical history. Critics attacked it before a single frame had been screened. There were accusations of anti-Semitism, calls for the film to be pulled, and a level of pre-release hostility that Gibson himself described as like nothing he had ever experienced. Think about that. This is the man who made Braveheart, who starred in Lethal Weapon, whose films had made hundreds of millions of dollars for studios that were now turning their backs on him. And they were turning their backs because of what? Because he wanted to tell a story about suffering and redemption that he believed with every fiber of his being was true. Gibson later went on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast and said something that stopped the room cold. He said that during the making of The Passion of the Christ, he encountered severe backlash because, in his words, Christianity is the only religion allowed to be treated with contempt in Hollywood. Every other belief system, every other spiritual tradition gets handled with care, with reverence, with the assumption that it deserves respect. But Gibson's faith, the one he was willing to spend his own money to defend, that was fair game. So he did something extraordinary. He financed the film himself, $30 million of his own money. No studio, no safety net, no Hollywood approval. He went through the fire alone, and The Passion of the Christ became the highest-grossing R-rated film in American history. $370.8 million at the box office against a $30 million budget. Not because of marketing, not because of studio support, because something in that story, something in the unflinching portrayal of suffering willingly endured, hit audiences at a depth that no amount of Hollywood gloss had ever reached. The monks of Tibet were searching for a truth profound enough to change a human being's relationship with suffering. Mel Gibson put it on a movie screen, and the world lined up around the block to see it. What the monks were hiding. Let's come back to the monastery now, because here is where everything connects. The hidden teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, the terma, the secret manuscripts, the oral traditions passed behind closed doors, all of them orbit the same central problem. The problem is this: if suffering is built into existence, and if the self that experiences suffering is ultimately an illusion, then what is the point? What gives any of it meaning? The Tibetan Buddhist answer: detachment, the dissolution of self, the eventual extinction of craving, is intellectually sophisticated and spiritually serious. But it leaves one thing unanswered, one massive gaping question that the monks buried alongside their manuscripts because they didn't have a satisfying response. The question is, what if suffering means something? Not what if you can transcend it. Not what if you can train yourself to stop being affected by it. But what if the suffering itself, the raw, ugly, unavoidable human experience of pain and loss and grief is not a malfunction. What if it is the mechanism? What if the way through is not around but into it? This is the claim at the center of Mel Gibson's faith. And it is the claim that the Tibetan tradition, for all its beauty and depth and ancient wisdom, was never quite able to make. Because to make that claim, you need something the monks didn't have. You need a God who suffers alongside you. You need a divine being who doesn't float above the pain, who doesn't offer you techniques to rise above it, but who chooses to go into it fully, body, blood, and all, and come out the other side. The cross is not a symbol of defeat. In Gibson's understanding of his faith, it is a symbol of the most radical claim any religion has ever made, that God entered human suffering not to demonstrate indifference to it or superiority over it, but to redeem it, to make it mean something, to take the worst thing that can happen to a human being and transform it into the source of the greatest possible hope. The monks buried their manuscripts. They hid their teachings. They constructed elaborate systems of secrecy because they were guarding something they believed was too powerful for ordinary eyes. But the secret they couldn't quite speak, the truth hiding at the bottom of all their searching, was that they were still looking for something that a carpenter from Nazareth had already claimed to be. And here is something worth pausing on, because it is easy to watch this comparison and assume the argument is simply that one religion is better than another. That is not what is being said here. The monks of Tibet produced centuries of genuine wisdom. Their understanding of the human mind, of impermanence, of the way attachment generates suffering. These are real insights that serious thinkers in every tradition have found valuable. The Dalai Lama has sat across from neuroscientists and held conversations about consciousness that left the scientists quietly reconsidering their assumptions. That is not nothing, but wisdom about suffering and the redemption of suffering are two entirely different things. And that distinction is exactly where Mel Gibson's faith plants its flag. Think about what redemption actually means. Not in the watered-down greeting card version, not the idea that things will eventually get better if you stay positive. Real redemption is the claim that something broken can be made to produce something that the unbroken version never could, that the wound becomes the source of the gift, that the very thing that nearly destroyed you is, in the end, the thing that made you capable of helping someone else survive the same darkness. That is not a Buddhist claim. That is not what detachment teaches. Detachment says, the wound hurts because you are attached to the idea of not being wounded. Stop the attachment, and the wound loses its power. It is logical. It is consistent. And for millions of people, in millions of circumstances, it has genuinely helped. But it does not tell you the wound meant something. It does not say the scar is a credential. It does not look at the worst chapter of your life and say, that was not a mistake in the story. That was the story. That is what Gibson found. That is what he put on the screen in 2004 at the cost of $30 million and his standing in the most powerful entertainment industry on Earth. Not a technique for managing pain, a claim that pain, entered fully and faithfully, can become the source of the world's greatest hope. The monks kept their manuscripts sealed because the truth inside them was incomplete. Gibson broke open his faith in front of the entire world because the truth inside it was the one thing he had found that held. The man who keeps walking through fire. Here is the final piece of the Mel Gibson story that you need to know. Because it would be easy to watch his public life fall apart and decide that his faith didn't work. The DUI arrest, the recorded rants, the public humiliation, the Hollywood exile that followed. By the late 2000s, Gibson had become one of the most derided figures in the entertainment industry. The man who had defied Hollywood to make the most successful religious film in history was now a punchline, a cautionary tale, a name people dropped when they wanted to illustrate how far a career could fall. And here is what he did with that. He kept going, not in the triumphant, redemption arc way that Hollywood loves to package, the tearful comeback interview, the perfectly timed apology tour, the carefully managed re-entry. His return was messier than that. more human than that. And this is the part that the people who dismissed Gibson never stopped long enough to examine. Because if you are going to talk about a faith that claims suffering has a purpose, a faith that puts redemption at the center of its entire framework, then the most important test of that faith is not what happens when things go well. It is what happens when the person who holds it falls completely apart in public. Mel Gibson fell completely apart in public, and the question his life poses, the uncomfortable, genuinely searching question that his story forces onto the table, is this: is the man who has failed publicly and catastrophically, and who has kept returning to his faith anyway, a hypocrite? Or is he exactly the kind of person that faith was designed for? Because the Tibetan monks, for all their wisdom, built a tradition that rewards those who discipline themselves toward enlightenment. The further you go, the cleaner your practice, the more elevated your state, the closer you are to liberation. It is a system that, at its highest levels, belongs to the extraordinary, to people willing to spend decades in silent retreat, to renounce ordinary life entirely, to train their minds with an intensity most of us will never approach. There is no shame in that. It is admirable. But it also means that the tradition, in its purest form, is not built for people like Mel Gibson. It is not built for people who have the wrong temperament, the wrong history, the wrong set of failures. It is not built for people who keep making the same mistakes and keep crawling back to something they can't stop believing in. Gibson's faith, by contrast, was built for exactly those people. That is not a secondary feature of it. That is the entire point of it. He continued to make films. Hacksaw Ridge, which he directed in 2016, won 2 Academy Awards and reminded the world that whatever his personal failures were, his artistic vision was intact. The film told the story of Desmond Doss, a man who refused to carry a weapon into one of the bloodiest battles of the Second World War, and who saved 75 men anyway, alone on a ridge in Okinawa, lowering the wounded down on a rope in the dark while praying the same prayer over and over. Lord, help me get one more. Gibson didn't choose that story by accident. A man surrounded by incomprehensible violence and suffering, sustained entirely by faith, doing the one thing he could do, one more, one more, one more. That story meant something personal to the man who made it. He has spoken openly about his failures, his brokenness, his need for something bigger than himself. And in June 2025, Mel Gibson made a pilgrimage to the Hilander Monastery on Mount Athos in Greece. Not for cameras, not for a press release. He spent several days at the Serbian Imperial Monastery, one of the oldest Christian spiritual centers in the world, seeking the same thing he has been seeking since his 35th year of life. Not escape from suffering, not the dissolution of self, not a technique for rising above the pain of being human. Presence, meaning, a God willing to be found in the dark. The monks of Tibet are still searching. They are still meditating, still translating manuscripts, still hiding their most precious teachings behind monastery walls at the top of the world. Their tradition is ancient and serious and deserving of genuine respect, but the truth they were circling, the thing buried, deepest in all that hidden wisdom, is the one truth Tibetan Buddhism, for all its magnificence, was never structured to deliver. The truth that suffering is not the obstacle. The truth that the most broken, most disgraced, most publicly humiliated version of you is not the end of the story. The truth that there is a way through the fire that doesn't require you to stop feeling it. Mel Gibson didn't find that truth in a cave. He found it in a cross. And the fact that Hollywood tried to bury it, the fact that studios, critics, and the entire entertainment establishment tried to keep that film off the screen, tells you something important. Some secrets are too powerful to stay hidden, and some truths, no matter how many walls you build around them, always find a way out. The question you have to answer. I want to leave you with something before you go. You have just heard about monks who spent 1,000 years hiding the most sacred knowledge they possessed, and a man who spent a decade in the dark before finding something that answered what the monks were still asking. Here is the question I want you to take with you. What are you doing with your suffering? Are you trying to detach from it, rise above it, meditate it into silence? Or is there a part of you, the honest part, the part that shows up at 3 in the morning when nobody else is around, that has always suspected the suffering might mean something? Because if it does mean something, if there is a purpose buried inside the worst thing that has ever happened to you, then the monk's system gives you no way to find it. Their system requires you to let go of the thing that might be the key. Mel Gibson's faith says, don't let go. Go deeper. The treasure isn't hidden in the mountain. It's on the other side of what you're afraid to face. If this video opened something up for you, if it made you think, made you question, or made you see either Mel Gibson or Tibetan Buddhism in a way you never had before, hit that like button right now and make sure you are subscribed, because we are just getting started and the conversations coming up on this channel are going to go places most channels are afraid to go. Drop a comment below. Tell me, do you think suffering has a purpose? Or is the Buddhist answer, let it go, the wiser path? I want to hear where you actually stand on this. The comment section is open. And unlike the monks, we are not hiding anything.